this week, as autumn finally descended here in Chicago, I visited a local public school and saw a sight that I must have seen 100 times before. There, as I walked through the asphalt parking lot next to this school, two girls were peeking at me from around the corner. Rosie was tentatively dipping her feet in a puddle, and Daisy was busy digging in the soil. And I took a few notes about my visit to the school to share with you today because it really struck me, the things that I saw there. If you strolled across this prized piece of asphalt next to this school, you'd notice a few other things. Yes, there's this worn-out set of monkey bars, but there's also a wind turbine and a solar energy learning lab. There's a greenhouse. There are compost bins. And amidst of these garden boxes, this is where the students played, and this is where those students learned. You see, their garden boxes aren't mere structures for growing plants, but actually, they became a literacy lesson or a geography teacher or a science study. As students explored topics like photosynthesis and pollination, graphing and multiplication. And on a typical day at this school, students embark on adventures in the snow, in the rain, and in the sunshine. They look for natural objects. They collect bugs. They sink their hands into the soil. They plant seeds. They measure rainwater. They harvest vegetables for lunch. They create maps of their neighborhood. They count the trees all the way down the block, and they examine with awe the colors of the birds. They smell the lemon verbena in the tea garden, and they taste those sweet peas fresh from the vine. And as I walked through the hallway and I began speaking with parents, a few things really struck me. I began to see a rare form of action. You know, these parents became exhilarated and sometimes wonderstruck by their child's determination when they came home from school and wanted to replace the entire front yard with Swiss chard and tomato plants. They were shocked by their child's curiosity and interest in bugs and insects, both inside and outside of the house. Children were wondering, why can't we have chickens living in our backyards and vermicomposting bins in our kitchens too? And one by one, these parents began joining their children alongside this amazing journey of sustainable education. What's interesting to me about this is as these students and families began to make these authentic connections with their local neighborhood and their local community, they suddenly began to see how they can impact the whole wide world. You see, after collecting rainwater and charting rainfall in their garden, caring for those halfway across the world who lack access to clean water becomes a much more significant and meaningful course. Critical thinking about the global origins of food and thinking about how they harvest their lunch and meeting those cows that produce the milk that comes to their school takes a very interesting turn. And learning about endangered species and the effects of climate change on life in the Arctic takes on an entirely new meaning after engaging with their local neighborhood species. And speaking of which, those neighborhood species, if you came to visit these students, you might hear something a bit peculiar emerging from the corner of their parking lot. There, nestled on a bed of hay, lies a little wooden coop. And in that wooden coop, 3 schoolyard chickens, Rosie, Daisy, and Bluebell, their 3 rescued chickens, live there in their schoolyard parking lot. Their public school is actually housed in a barrel factory. And the barrel factory is located in between a truck part shop and a pallet company. I'm here today to tell you that I actually work at this school. And it's a magical, magical place. It's located in one of Chicago's most underserved communities, where children every day are creating change. You know, they start their day with an organic breakfast. They practice yoga. They have nutrition education. They are taught by some of the nation's most incredible teachers. They study 2 languages within the context of one of the world's most significant and challenging educational frameworks called the International Baccalaureate program. And you know, many people hear about these things and they think, wow, Sarah Elizabeth, that's so cute. It's so cute that your students practice yoga and are eating great food. How nice. How wonderful that this great form of education is happening on Chicago's South Side. But is it working? Are these students actually learning anything? Or are you just, preparing these students to become yogis? And some exciting things have happened. When we opened our school in 2008, 11% of our students, our first grade students, entered reading at grade level, meaning 89% of our public school students could not read. And at the end of that first year, 51% of our first grade students were meeting or exceeding literacy standards. But 1 year later, 80% of those students were meeting or exceeding literacy standards. That is unprecedented growth. But what's more is that 90% of our third grade students in 2011 were meeting or exceeding math standards. And 81% of these students are low income. So as you can imagine, the Academy for Global Citizenship was born out of a dream to create a school that empowered every child to reach their potential, a dream to completely reimagine what public education could be like with no limitations, a dream to teach children early on about the magnificence of nature, about the responsibility of living in a global ecosystem, about the beauty of differences. March 24th, 2011. It was the day of our enrollment lottery this past year. And there I sat in a room full of hundreds of parents and hundreds of children. There were 22 spots, 22 seats available at our school. And we had 310 applications. 1 out of every 14 of these families was going to get a seat in the public school where they believed would best prepare their child. Now imagine if you look down your row and count the next 14 people sitting next to you. Imagine for one moment, 13 out of 14 of these families had to find another place to send their child to school. And this, for me, was not so much a dream. Let me put that into perspective for you. That's 7.1%. That is a lower admission rate than MIT, than Stanford, than Princeton. This is not a dream for these families. This is the reality of the public education system in which we live. I spent a lot of time dreaming about solar panels and about gardens and about chickens and about yoga and about this amazing environment in which to prepare these kids. But for these parents and for parents in rooms like this across the country, this was not a dream. They had to wake up the next morning and think about the implications that single moment would have on the rest of their child's life. I began to think about this reality. I began to think about the fact that our nation, our country, talks about things like equality and about civil rights. I looked up that word, civil rights, and I found a few definitions. The rights of citizens to social freedom and equality, ensuring one's ability to participate in civil life without discrimination, ensuring people's safety and integrity. And the more I thought about this reality and about what was happening, this began to feel like a violation of these children's civil rights on March 24th, 2011. That vivid moment when Maria approached me. Maria was among those 13 of 14 families who did not get chosen. Maria was crying. She was concerned about her child's future. She did not have a choice. And she came to me with one question. She asked me, "What can I do?" So much of this dream for the school was based on the same question. What can we do? What can we do to take everything that we've learned about international best practices in education design everything we know about teaching and learning in the 21st century, everything we know to be true about pedagogy. And how can we incorporate that into this school that has no limitations, that believes in the impossible? What can happen? But on March 24th, that question Maria had was out of despair. And she realized that this single moment was going to dictate every single day of her child's life, because the other option for Maria, because of where she lives in our city of Chicago, was to attend the neighborhood public school down the street. This is a school where 3.8% of all students are exceeding state standards. This is a school that has had 6 principals in the last 5 years. And this is a school where 0% of their 8th grade students are exceeding state standards in 2009. 0%. Could you imagine sending your child to a school where 0% of the 8th grade students were exceeding state standards? You know, this dream of mine suddenly became my greatest nightmare. And for every night since March 24th, this has become a very challenging realization for me. What we are doing is not enough. We serve 250 students in our Chicago public school. Eventually, we'll have the capacity to serve 550 students. And you know, as I was beginning to think about this and grapple with this and really struggle with what am I going to do with my life, I began to realize that I'm not alone. We're all actually living in this nightmare together. And I don't mean we as educators, or we as people working in this movement, or we as in the people sitting in this room, or the innovative people sitting here in the audience today, change makers and leaders. Not we, our generation, all of us, all of humanity. This is our collective responsibility. I stand here today to tell you that it's time that we all wake up and we begin to dream toward the reality of a brighter future. This is not just about Maria. It's about the 81.5 million children that attend public schools in this nation. And I believe that we can do something better. So it's no time to dream. It is time to act. And it is time to demand that every child across this nation has access to a high-quality public education. You know, as I was reading about civil rights, I found this quote: "When civil and political rights are not guaranteed to all as part of equal protection of laws, or when such guarantees exist on paper but are not respected in practice, opposition and even social unrest may ensue." So I'd like to challenge you to wreak havoc. I think it's time to raise a little bit of hell. Forget about social unrest or a little opposition. We have the power to demand change. We have the power to ignite a revolution. And this problem will not be solved by a few people sitting in this room. This problem will not be solved by the Department of Education. This problem can only be solved when each and every single one of us stands up and says, I am part of the solution. So this new benchmark for equality must be the highest performing, not the lowest performing school. And as a nation, if we have agreed that the Chicago or the public school system isn't, and every child is entitled to a high quality public education, then this is what we must demand. So you might be asking, so what's the answer? There's not one single answer. There are many answers, and it is up to every single one of us to do what we can to participate in the dialogue until this is resolved. So I hope that when you return home to your community, I hope that your principal calls you. I hope that your principal calls you and says, please come and mentor a child. Please come and read to the students in my school, or please come and talk about something you're passionate about. Come and present to a class. Come start a wellness committee and help us think about how we can incorporate healthier food into our school. Come build a garden. But you know, if you return and there isn't a phone call, Pick up the phone and call the principal of your neighborhood school and ask them what you can do to get involved. Be that person who drives the next group of parents or people in your community down to your state capitol and demand that your children and all children receive a high-quality public education. The other thing that I would ask you to think about today is how you can support educational entrepreneurs or people in your community who are looking to scale the innovative practices in education that we know to be working. There are models and there are things happening in every community, and we need to figure out how we can scale these opportunities on a national level. Perhaps we can't move mountains. Perhaps we can't lift up big boulders. But you know, we all can do something. We can all take a pebble and toss it into the pond, and a ripple occurs. And through your determination and your passion, you inspire others to join alongside you in transforming public education, in doing something that makes a difference. And suddenly what begins to happen is one by one, those ripples begin to converge and they create a wave of change. So this is not a story about Maria. This is a story about you. Thanks.